Berlin, 1932. Germany has no air force. The Treaty of Versailles made that illegal. The punishment for violations? Immediate Allied military intervention. By 1939, the Luftwaffe fields 4,093 combat aircraft, the most advanced in the world, and nobody fired a single shot to stop it. Not one Allied soldier, not one intervention, not one consequence. How does a nation rebuild a military air force that is legally forbidden in plain sight over 7 years while 14 Allied nations watch, report it, and do absolutely nothing? The answer is not what you think. This wasn't a secret operation hidden in bunkers. It wasn't spies and coded messages. The Nazis rebuilt the most powerful air force in Europe using flight schools, glider clubs, and a state airline. And the Allies didn't just miss it. They knew, and they chose to look away. If you study dictators and the systems they exploit, subscribe to the Dictator Lab. This is where history's most dangerous machinery gets dissected. The crisis/setup, the cage. November 11th, 1918. The armistice ends World War I. Germany doesn't just lose. It is dismantled by legal architecture specifically designed to make another German war structurally impossible. The Treaty of Versailles, signed June 28, 1919, contains Article 198. 4 words that end German air power entirely. Germany shall have none. No military aircraft, no air force, no aviation industry for military purposes, zero. The German Imperial Air Service, which had fielded 2,709 aircraft at its peak, is ordered dissolved within 3 months. But the Allies don't stop there. Article 201 bans Germany from manufacturing or importing aircraft or aero engines for a period of 6 months after the treaty's signing. And that ban gets extended repeatedly. Article 202 requires Germany to hand over 1,700 aircraft and 27,000 aero engines to the Allied powers. Not destroy them, hand them over, strip Germany's own industrial capacity and transfer it to the victors. The Inter-Allied Control Commission, a team of foreign military inspectors, is stationed inside Germany with the explicit authority to physically enter any facility, inspect any building, and verify compliance. Germany is not trusted to self-report. It is supervised. By 1920, the German army is capped at 100,000 men. No tanks above a certain weight. No heavy artillery above certain calibers. No submarines. No air force. The cage is real. The locks are real. The guards are standing at the gate. The world does not invade. The world does not sanction. The world sends congratulatory diplomatic cables. This is where Weimar Germany's shadow aviation program and the man who architects it enters the story. The mechanism/the wizard. The mechanism. His name is Hans von Seeckt. And most people studying World War II have never heard of him. Von Seeckt is appointed Chief of the German Army Command in 1920. He is 54 years old, thin as a blade, monocled, aristocratic, a Prussian officer who fought on 3 fronts in World War I and came away convinced of one thing: Germany's defeat was tactical, not permanent. He has no intention of accepting Versailles as a final verdict. But here's how it worked. Step 1. He creates the Fliegertruppe, a clandestine aviation office buried inside the German Army's transportation department. On paper, it coordinates civilian air traffic logistics. In reality, it is the planning headquarters of a future air force, staffed by former Imperial Air Service officers who are paid as civilian transportation administrators. This is the part that rewrites your understanding of 1920s geopolitics. In April 1922, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Treaty of Rapallo, ostensibly a trade normalization agreement. But attached to Rapallo, invisible to the Allies, is a secret military cooperation clause. By 1925, Germany is operating a fully functional military pilot training school inside Soviet territory, near the city of Lipetsk, 400 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Imagine you are a German military pilot in 1927. You take a civilian train to Moscow dressed as a tourist. You travel south to Lipetsk under a false identity. You walk into a facility that officially does not exist. For the next 18 months, you fly fighter aircraft, practice aerial combat maneuvers, test new weapons systems, and receive instruction from former Imperial Air Service veterans. Then you return to Germany, still on paper a civilian with no military record. Between 1925 and 1933, approximately 120 German pilots train at Lipetsk. They don't just learn to fly, they write doctrine. They develop tactical manuals. They theorize about combined arms air operations, ideas that become the foundation of Blitzkrieg. But the Lipetsk school is only one layer. Inside Germany, von Seeckt constructs the second layer using something no Allied inspector can legally touch. Sports clubs? The scheme in action. The scheme. This is the gap von Seeckt drives an air force through. By 1932, still 3 years before Hitler announces the Luftwaffe, Germany has trained approximately 4,000 civilian pilots, with skills directly transferable to military aviation. That is 4,000 men who can, within weeks, transition into combat roles. Meanwhile, in 1926, the German government launches Lufthansa, the national civilian airline. On the surface, a commercial enterprise. Behind the surface, a state-funded program for training navigators, developing long-range route networks, and testing aircraft performance at scale. Lufthansa's pilots fly in precise formations. Lufthansa's engineers develop aircraft to specifications that, coincidentally, mirror military requirements. Lufthansa's network maps German infrastructure with military-grade precision. The Allies know about Lufthansa. They approve of it. Commercial aviation is permitted. Then comes the aircraft manufacturers. In 1919, the treaty bans Germany from building military aircraft. Germany's aviation companies, Fokker, Junkers, Dornier, Heinkel, face existential crisis. Von Seeckt's solution is elegant and ruthless. He helps them relocate production abroad. Correction, Anthony Fokker was Dutch, and his main operation was already based in the Netherlands. His wartime German subsidiary had produced aircraft for Germany, but after the war, he continued his Dutch-based company. Hugo Junkers establishes production subsidiaries in Sweden, Turkey, and the Soviet Union. Ernst Heinkel runs design operations from facilities the inspectors never visit. The German aviation industry doesn't die. It goes international. And here is where it gets dark. The Junkers F-13, developed in Germany in 1919, becomes the world's first all-metal passenger aircraft. It enters civilian service globally. Airlines in 20 countries operate it. What the world doesn't know is that its airframe is designed to specifications that allow rapid military conversion. The F-13's direct descendant, the Junkers Ju-52, becomes the Luftwaffe's primary transport aircraft in 1935. Germany spends 6 years building a civilian aviation industry that is, structurally and functionally, a military aviation industry with the serial numbers filed off. By January 1933, when Hitler becomes Chancellor, he doesn't inherit a blank slate. He inherits 4,000 trained pilots, a functioning aviation industry, combat doctrine developed at Lipetsk, a nationwide training infrastructure, and a state airline that is already operating as a quasi-military logistics network. Hitler doesn't build the Luftwaffe, he reveals it. The dark side, it gets worse. The dark side. Here's the first thing most historians won't put in the headline. The Allies knew, not suspected, knew. The Inter-Allied Control Commission filed 65 formal reports between 1920 and 1926 documenting violations of the aviation clauses of Versailles. By 65, they flagged the glider clubs, they flagged the Junkers foreign subsidiaries, they flagged suspicious personnel rosters at what were labelled civilian airfields. British intelligence specifically identified the Lipetsk facility by 1926, 1 year after it opened. Correction? The Commission's final report, submitted in 1927 before effective enforcement ended, the control machinery continued in reduced form until 1931, explicitly states, and this is documented by historian Sally Marks, that Germany's compliance with the military clauses of Versailles was incomplete and aviation violations were ongoing. The Allied governments received this report. They thanked the Commission. They effectively dissolved meaningful enforcement. and they did nothing. Why? Because by 1924, the political calculus had shifted. Britain's treasury feared that aggressive enforcement of Versailles would economically collapse Germany and spread communist revolution westward. France was internally divided. The United States had retreated into isolationism and never ratified the treaty in the first place. Enforcement required unanimous Allied political will. That will did not exist. The cage had a lock. Nobody wanted to turn the key, but it gets worse. You won't believe this. In 1933, after Hitler becomes Chancellor and German rearmament accelerates dramatically, Britain actively facilitates it. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement of June 1935, signed just 3 months after Hitler publicly announces the Luftwaffe, formally permits Germany to build a navy up to 35% of British tonnage. Britain signs this bilaterally, without informing France, without consulting the League of Nations. It is the first explicit Allied endorsement of German treaty violation, signed into law with a handshake and a diplomatic communiqué. The message it sends to Hitler is unambiguous. The Allies will negotiate boundaries. They will not enforce them. And then, this is the reveal that makes the whole story grotesque. Germany's Luftwaffe gets its first real combat testing not in Europe, but in Spain. The Spanish Civil War begins in July 1936. Hitler sends the Condor Legion, a force of 19,000 German military personnel rotating through Spain on what are officially described as volunteer assignments. These are active Luftwaffe personnel in everything but the paperwork. They fly Heinkel, her 51 fighters and Junkers, Ju-52 bombers in live combat operations. On April 26, 1937, the Condor Legion bombs the Basque city of Guernica. The attack lasts 3 hours and 15 minutes. Approximately 150 to 1,600 civilians are killed. The estimates vary, in what becomes the first deliberate aerial bombardment of a civilian population in European history. But here is what Guernica really is, from the Luftwaffe's operational perspective. It is a field test. The bomb patterns are analysed, the timing intervals are recorded, the structural damage assessments are filed. General Wolfram von Richthofen, commanding the Legion, writes operational reports that directly inform Luftwaffe doctrine for the next 4 years. Guernica is not a war crime in isolation, it is a training exercise with civilian casualties. And the most chilling part? It works. Every lesson learned over Guernica is applied over Warsaw in 1939, over Rotterdam in 1940, over London in 1940. The bombing campaign that kills tens of thousands of European civilians runs on doctrine that was written in the ruins of a Basque market town. The Allies watched Germany test its illegal air force on Spanish civilians and responded with a non-intervention agreement that every participating nation violated immediately and openly. The collapse verdict: the collapse. By September 1st, 1939, the day Germany invades Poland and initiates World War II, the Luftwaffe fields 4,093 aircraft, 1,176 bombers, 1,179 fighters, 366 dive bombers, 40 ground attack aircraft, and 1,332 transport and support aircraft. It is the most battle-tested, doctrinally sophisticated air force in the world. Poland's air force has 463 aircraft. France has 1,400, but they are dispersed, outdated, and not integrated into a combined arms doctrine. Britain's Royal Air Force has 1,911 aircraft, many of which are not frontline combat ready. The air force that was legally forbidden to exist 20 years earlier is now the dominant air power in Europe. But here is the counterintuitive verdict, the one that rewrites how you understand this story. Nazi Germany did not outmaneuver the Allies chose to be outmaneuvered. The Luftwaffe's secret construction was not the failure of Allied intelligence. It was the failure of Allied political will at every single decision point where enforcement was possible and chosen against. 3 pillars explain how this happens. First, institutional legitimacy as cover. Von Seeckt understood that the Allies would not dismantle institutions that looked civilian. Glider clubs, airlines and export companies carry legitimacy that bunkers do not. Every layer of the programme was designed to cost the Allies political capital to attack. They chose not to spend it. Second, the enforcement vacuum. The Treaty of Versailles created obligations without creating consequences. There was no automatic trigger for military intervention. Every violation required a political decision to respond. And political decisions require political consensus, which the Allies never again achieved after 1919. Third, the appeasement incentive. By the early 1930s, European politicians had constructed an entire ideological framework, appeasement, that reframed capitulation as sophistication. Enforcing treaty terms was recast as provoking Germany. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement is the clearest example. Britain didn't just ignore German rearmament, it rewarded it with a bilateral treaty. The Luftwaffe is, in one sense, the largest and most consequential foreign policy failure in the history of democratic governance. 14 nations with legal authority to prevent it, intelligence confirming it, and military capacity to stop it chose not to. And yet, here is the question I want you to argue about in the comments, because there is no clean answer. If the Allies had enforced Versailles aggressively in 1925, crushed the glider clubs, shut down Lipetsk, sanctioned the aviation companies, would that have prevented World War II? Or would it have created exactly the economic desperation and nationalist rage that brought Hitler to power in the first place? Was appeasement the cause of the war? Or was it the only policy that delayed it? Leave your answer below. The argument is the point.